What if everything you've been taught about strength is a lie? What if comfort isn't your reward, but your greatest weakness? 2,000 years ago, a group of philosophers discovered a way to turn pain into power, and it made them unbreakable. A slave who felt freer than his masters. An emperor who stayed calm as his empire burned. A man who lost everything and still found peace. How did they do it? They lived by 8 brutal laws. Laws so powerful they can rewire your mind and change how you face life itself. This isn't motivation. It's mental warfare, and it begins right now. What kind of mind can stare at death and feel no fear? What kind of person can lose everything, power, wealth, freedom, and still remain unbroken inside? How did some of history's greatest men, surrounded by chaos and blood and betrayal, find a stillness that no storm could shatter? These are not the questions of a philosopher in peace, but of a human being at war, not with the world, but with himself. The ancient Mediterranean world was burning. Empires rose and crumbled. Tyrants ruled, armies marched, and ordinary men lived under the constant shadow of death. The gods seemed silent, their temples filled not with hope, but with echoes. And in that silence, a man named Zeno of Citium lost everything. His ship sank off the coast of Athens, taking with it all his wealth and his purpose. Yet what most would call disaster, he called awakening. Zeno later said, "I made a prosperous voyage when I suffered a shipwreck." Out of ruin came revelation. Wandering into a small Athenian bookstore, he picked up the writings of Socrates' words about virtue, reason, and control. He was captivated. It was there, amid the noise of the marketplace, that a new philosophy was born. Stoicism, not a religion, not a theory, a weapon, a way to endure a brutal world without breaking. The first Stoics gathered not in palaces, but on the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch of Athens, where merchants shouted and beggars pleaded. It was fitting. Their philosophy belonged to the real world, not to ivory towers. They studied human weakness, dissected emotion, and forged rules to outlast chaos. They asked, what is truly in our control? The answer, almost nothing, except our own minds. This was their rebellion. When others worshipped fortune, they worshipped reason. When others ran from pain, they studied it. And slowly, a new kind of strength took shape, one not born from comfort, but from clarity. Years passed, empires shifted. Greece gave way to Rome, but Stoicism did not die. It spread through the veins of the empire like iron in the blood. It found its way into the hearts of slaves and emperors, soldiers and poets. Because life in Rome was war, political, physical, psychological, and Stoicism became the armor that made survival possible. The Roman general could lose his army. The senator could lose his honor. The slave could lose his freedom. But none of them could lose their mind unless they allowed it. That was the Stoic creed. You may chain my body, but not my soul. Think of Epictetus, born a slave, crippled by his master, yet free in every way that mattered. He said, "No man is free who is not a master of himself." Think of Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the known world, writing by candlelight during a plague, whispering to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." And think of Seneca, the philosopher forced to die by his own pupil, meeting death with calm dignity. These men lived and died by 8 brutal laws, unspoken rules that reshaped their minds, rewired their emotions, and made them unbreakable. They didn't promise happiness. They promised strength. They didn't remove pain. They redefined it. Each law was born not from theory, but from suffering. Each one was a scar turned into wisdom. Together, they formed the backbone of a philosophy that could face the worst of life and still stand tall. The first law taught them that pain was not the enemy, it was the teacher. The second showed that control was the key to freedom. The third warned that emotion destroys reason. The fourth prepared them for the cruelty of fortune. The fifth accepted death as the great equalizer. The sixth held virtue as the only good. The seventh revealed discipline as the path to freedom. And the eighth unlocked the unbreakable mind, the final evolution of the Stoic way. But before we reach them, imagine this. You stand in a Roman courtyard. The sky glows red as the sun sinks behind marble columns. A man in tattered robes stands before a crowd, his voice steady, his eyes sharp. You suffer, he says, because you expect the world to be kind. The crowd falls silent. That man could be Zeno, or Epictetus, or Marcus Aurelius himself. It doesn't matter because their message was one: The world owes you nothing, yet your mind can make everything bearable. The Stoic does not run from fire, he walks through it. He does not beg for comfort, he forges strength. He does not fear death, he learns from it. Because to be Stoic is to accept the world not as it should be, but as it is. And through that acceptance, you discover power no army can take, no loss can erase it, and no time can destroy it. The world of the Stoics may be ancient, but their struggle is ours. We live in comfort, yet our minds are weak. We chase pleasure, yet drown in anxiety. We have everything and still feel empty. Perhaps it's time to remember what they knew, that the only true control we ever have is within, that the only real battle worth fighting is against the chaos of our own thoughts. Because when the storm comes, and it always comes, the question is not whether you can stop it. The question is whether you can stand still inside it. The first Stoic law begins where most people break with pain. Pain is the great equalizer. It humbles kings and slaves alike. It erases illusions. It exposes truth. And for the Stoics, it was not something to avoid, it was something to study. They believed that pain, properly understood, could become the most powerful tool of transformation. Because pain does not lie. Comfort can deceive, success can flatter, but pain always tells the truth. Zeno learned it when the sea swallowed his fortune. Epictetus learned it when his master twisted his leg until it broke. Marcus Aurelius learned it when plague took his children. Each of them stood before suffering and made the same choice to face it, not to flee. In a world obsessed with avoiding discomfort, they saw it as training. They believed that by choosing controlled pain, you built armor for the uncontrolled pain that life would one day deliver. Seneca practiced sleeping on the floor. Marcus practiced losing what he loved. Epictetus practiced enduring insults without reaction. Because if you can't handle the small sting, how will you survive the strike that truly matters? They didn't glorify suffering, they prepared for it. The obstacle, Marcus wrote, becomes the way. Every hardship a forge, every challenge a test, every loss an invitation to mastery. And when you start to live that way, when you start to see pain not as punishment but as preparation, something inside you shifts. The fear begins to fade. The chaos becomes manageable. The storm stops feeling personal. You stop asking, why me? And start asking, what can this teach me? Because the Stoic knew that pain could shape the mind just as fire tempers steel. Without heat, the blade is soft. Without pressure, the soul remains weak. But here's the brutal truth. This philosophy only works if you live it. You can't just quote Marcus Aurelius. You have to test yourself. That's why Epictetus would tell his students, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. He didn't mean theory. He meant practice. He meant discipline. He meant choosing the harder road not because it's noble, but because it's necessary. So imagine waking up tomorrow and seeking discomfort on purpose, taking a cold shower, skipping a meal, speaking the truth you've been afraid to say. It sounds small, but that's where it begins. That's where mental armor is built. The Stoics didn't wait for war to test their strength. They trained for it every day in silence, in simplicity, in struggle. And when life finally hit them, they didn't break. They bent, but never bowed, because pain had already been their teacher. The second Stoic law is the anchor that held them firm through chaos. Control what you can, let go of what you can't. It sounds simple, but it's the difference between madness and peace. Most people live as if they can bend the world to their will. They fight to change the weather, the traffic, the opinions of others, and when the world resists, they shatter. But the Stoic doesn't waste energy on the uncontrollable. He focuses only on what lies within the narrow walls of his own power, his thoughts, his actions, his responses. That's all. Everything else, fate, luck, other people, time, belongs to the universe. Epictetus called it the dichotomy of control, and he warned that anyone who ignored it was choosing to suffer. If you desire what is not in your control, he said, you will never be free. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. It became his meditation, his mantra, his survival code. Because as emperor, he faced the impossible, wars on the borders, betrayal in his court, death in his family. He could not command fortune, but he could command himself. That's why he wrote, not for an audience, not for glory, but for sanity. Every night, he reminded himself what belonged to him and what did not. And through that separation came peace. The Stoics were not emotionless. They felt anger, fear, sadness just as we do. The difference is, they refused to let those emotions drive their action. They understood that emotion is like wind. You cannot stop it from blowing, but you can decide whether to build a wall or raise a sail. So they chose to sail. They learned to pause before reacting, to question before judging, to breathe before exploding. In that pause, they found power. Power that kings envy. Power that money can't buy. Because once you master your reaction, the world can no longer control you. This idea was radical then, and it's still radical now. In an age where everyone reacts instantly to comments, insults, news, fear, the Stoic stands apart. Calm, deliberate, grounded. He knows the storm will pass. And when it does, he's still standing not because he fought harder, but because he wasted no strength fighting the wind. Control what you can, release what you can't. That was their compass. It's what allowed Epictetus to remain free in slavery, Marcus to remain humble in power, Seneca to remain calm in death. They built peace not by changing the world, but by mastering themselves. And in that mastery, they discovered a secret the modern world has forgotten. When you stop trying to control everything, you gain control of the only thing that truly matters, yourself. That's how the Stoics built minds that no chaos could break. The third Stoic law is both brutal and liberating. Do not be ruled by emotion. It sounds cold, almost inhuman. But to the Stoics, it was the highest form of strength, not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it. They knew that emotion is the first weapon the world uses against you. Anger blinds you. Fear paralyzes you. Desire distracts you. And once you are ruled by any of them, you are no longer free. Epictetus told his students, "Any man capable of angering you becomes your master." That one line could undo an empire's worth of chaos. He had lived it. Born a slave, beaten, insulted, humiliated, yet his composure never cracked. His master could injure his body, but never his peace. He'd learned early that freedom was not granted, it was earned through control. The Stoics saw emotion as a signal, not a command. To them, anger was not evil. Fear was not shameful. They were simply messages from the body, but not orders for the soul. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You will not be harmed by the thing itself, only by your opinion of it." He meant that your mind shapes your suffering. The insult only cuts because you let it. The loss only destroys you because you cling to it. The fear only wins because you feed it. The Stoic does not suppress emotion, he examines it. He asks, "Is this useful?" He observes his own anger like a scientist watches a storm, detached, curious, patient. That's what separates a child from a philosopher. The child reacts, the Stoic reflects. And through reflection, he gains control. Seneca, the wealthiest philosopher of Rome, wrote letters to his friend Lucilius on this very thing. He warned that the man who reacts in rage loses the battle before it begins. Anger, he said, is a temporary madness. It was more than theory. Seneca lived surrounded by political enemies. One wrong word could mean death. So he trained himself to respond with calm precision, no matter the provocation. When Nero, his own student, ordered his execution, Seneca didn't curse or plead. He simply opened his veins, comforted his wife, and spoke calmly to his friends until he died. That is not emotionlessness. That is mastery. The Stoics did not want to erase emotion, they wanted to govern it, the way a rider governs a wild horse. You do not kill the horse. You learn to steer it. Because without control, passion becomes poison. And they knew something else, that those who control their emotions control others. In the Senate, in battle, in betrayal, the calm man always leads. The impulsive man always falls. Even today, it's no different. The modern world runs on reaction, outrage, envy, fear. We scroll through chaos, feeding emotions that destroy focus and peace. But imagine applying the Stoic code now. Imagine feeling anger rise, and instead of reacting, you pause. You breathe. You think. You win. Because no one can control you if they can't control your reaction. That's how emperors survived courts of lies. That's how generals led through panic. That's how you stay unbroken when the world collapses. And that leads to the fourth law, one that shocks modern minds. Stop expecting fairness. It's the hardest pill to swallow, but the most freeing truth you'll ever accept. The Stoics believe that fairness is a myth, a comforting illusion we invent to soften the pain of existence. The universe, they said, does not owe you balance. Seneca once wrote, "What need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears. Even he, surrounded by luxury, saw injustice everywhere. Rome rewarded cruelty. Innocent men died. Good deeds went unseen. But he refused to despair. Because the Stoic knows that life was never meant to be fair, it was meant to test you. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal from his closest allies. His empire was plagued by famine, disease, and rebellion. Yet he never cursed fate. Instead, he told himself, "The world is changing, life is opinion." Meaning, you can't stop the storm, but you can choose how to see it. To expect fairness is to expect the ocean to be calm. The Stoic sails anyway. He sees that complaining changes nothing, that waiting for justice wastes time, that blaming fate is weakness disguised as morality. Because fairness is not a law of nature, it's a demand of ego. When we cry, "It's not fair," what we really mean is, "I didn't get what I wanted." The Stoic replaces that with a stronger question. What can I do with what I got? That shift in focus is everything. It's what made Roman generals endure defeat and rebuild armies. What made slaves endure punishment and still find peace? What made philosophers endure injustice and still find purpose? Life will betray you. You will be lied to, wronged, and overlooked. The Stoic accepts this before it happens, and in doing so, robs it of power. Because when you expect to struggle, it cannot shock you. When you expect loss, it cannot define you. When you stop expecting fairness, you start expecting yourself. And that is the birth of real strength, the kind that doesn't depend on applause or luck. That's what Stoicism forged in men like Marcus, Seneca, and Epictetus, a kind of quiet defiance. They didn't need life to be fair, they needed only the strength to face it. And so they did. They faced war without fear, betrayal without hatred, loss without despair, because they knew that fairness isn't promised, but fortitude is earned. In that acceptance, they found peace deeper than pleasure, power stronger than rage, and freedom greater than any empire. The fifth Stoic law is where philosophy leaves the page and enters the flesh practice: voluntary hardship. It's brutal, counterintuitive, almost cruel. Why choose discomfort when life already brings enough of it? But that's exactly why the Stoics did it, because they refused to be surprised by suffering. Seneca, one of the richest men in Rome, would deliberately sleep on the floor, eat coarse bread, and wear rough clothing for days. His friends thought it was madness. He called it training. He would whisper to himself, "Is this what I feared?" And every time, he found that the fear of loss was worse than loss itself. That's the power of voluntary hardship. It breaks the illusion that you can't live without comfort, because comfort breeds weakness. It lulls the mind into fragility. And when the storm comes, and it always comes, the untested man crumbles. The Stoic wants to crumble now, on his own terms, so that he will not crumble later when fate chooses the battlefield. Epictetus told his students, "Difficulties show what men are." He knew that you don't rise to your expectations, you fall to your level of training. So they trained in the only way that mattered through hardship. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor, rose before dawn to write, to reflect, to discipline himself before leading a world on fire. He could have drowned in luxury, but instead, he lived like a soldier. Because luxury dulls, hardship sharpens. When you seek discomfort, you reclaim your edge. You remember that pain can't kill you, but comfort can. Every cold bath, every skipped meal, every day of restraint builds invisible muscle, the muscle of endurance. And endurance is everything. Because if you can endure hunger, insult, rejection, uncertainty, then nothing can own you. That's why the Stoics practiced loss in advance. They would imagine their fortune gone, their home burned, their loved ones dead. Not out of despair, but preparation. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evil. It wasn't pessimism, it was armor. Because when you've rehearsed loss, it cannot shock you. When you've stared at tragedy in the mind, it loses its power to destroy you in reality. Seneca wrote, "He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming." To modern ears, that sounds dark, but it's the light of truth. Most people break not because of pain, but because they never expected it. The Stoic expects it, he trains for it, and when it arrives, he smiles, because he has met this enemy before. The sixth Stoic law completes this training, detached from outcomes. This one is merciless, because it strikes at the root of human desire, the need to win, to be recognized, to control how things turn out. But the Stoics saw the trap in that. You can control your effort, never the result. You can control your aim, never the arrow once it leaves the bow. You can speak the truth, but you cannot control who hears it. The Stoic focuses on the process, not the prize. On the doing, not the reward. Because attachment to outcome breeds disappointment, frustration, and despair. Epictetus said, "Do not seek for events to happen as you wish, but wish for events to happen as they do, and your life will flow well." It sounds like surrender, but it's actually power. To detach from outcomes is not to stop caring, it's to care correctly. You care about your integrity, your effort, your virtue. You let go of everything else. Marcus Aurelius repeated this idea constantly in his meditations. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. That's where his focus ended. He didn't obsess over the future of his empire, the judgment of history, or the approval of men. He knew those things were shadows beyond his reach. His duty was today. His control was now. That's why Stoicism feels ruthless. It cuts through illusion like a blade. It reminds you that the only true victory is over yourself. When you detach from results, you can't be manipulated. You can't be broken by failure or addicted to success. Because whether you win or lose, you remain steady. It's like the archer who draws his bow with full focus, releases the arrow with skill, and accepts wherever it lands. Because his mastery was in the act, not the outcome. The Stoic trains his mind to live that way, to do everything as if it mattered infinitely, and to accept the result as if it mattered not at all. It's paradoxical, but it's freedom. Because once you stop needing things to go your way, you start walking any way with peace. The Stoics called this living in harmony with nature, aligning your mind with reality instead of fighting it. You become like the river, flowing around obstacles instead of breaking against them. That's why Marcus could rule an empire without ego. Why could Epictetus live as a slave and still call himself free? Why Seneca could face death without fear? Because they had already detached from what could be taken. Their happiness was built on what could not. And that is the essence of this law, to live with intention, but without obsession. To give everything, but expect nothing. To fight with honor, but accept the outcome with grace. Once you do that, failure loses its teeth, success loses its chains, and life in all its chaos finally becomes peaceful. You don't own outcomes. You own effort, and that's enough. The seventh Stoic law is the darkest and the most awakening. Memento mori. Remember, you will die. Those words were not meant to depress, they were meant to ignite. Because when you truly remember death, life sharpens. Trivial things lose their grip. The noise fades. The importance becomes clear. The Stoics carried this reminder everywhere. On coins, on rings, in quiet whispers at dawn. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." It wasn't fear. It was focused. They believed that death was not the enemy. Forgetting to live was. And so they meditated on mortality, not to mourn, but to awaken, to live as if each breath was borrowed. Because the man who remembers death wastes no time. He stops living as if he has forever. He stops postponing courage, kindness, truth. He speaks what needs to be spoken. He does what must be done. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." He watched men chase money, gossip, power, illusions of permanence, while the clock silently bled them dry. So he flipped the perspective. Death was not distant. It was beside you, walking quietly, patiently. That knowledge didn't paralyze him, it set him free. Because once you accept death, what's left to fear? Rejection, judgment, failure, they all lose their teeth. The Stoic lived ready, ready to go, ready to act, ready to let go. That's why they built monuments not to glory, but to awareness. In Rome, soldiers marching in triumph had a slave behind them whispering, "Remember, you are mortal." It was not an insult. It was instruction. Because nothing poisons the soul faster than the illusion of immortality. We scroll, we plan, we dream endlessly, as if time is infinite, but it's not. And the Stoics wanted us to look directly at that truth, not with dread, but with clarity. If today were your last, would you still waste it on anger? Would you still scroll through strangers' lives? Would you still swallow your truth to please the crowd? Memento mori cuts through delusion. It reminds you that life is not measured by its length, but by its depth, by how awake you are while it lasts. The final Stoic law, the one that crowns them all, live with virtue, not approval. It is the law that holds the rest together, the purpose behind the pain, the control, the detachment. Because to the Stoics, virtue was the only true good. Not wealth, not power, not reputation. Virtue, the courage to do what's right, the wisdom to see clearly, the justice to act fairly, the discipline to live with purpose. Everything else, fame, comfort, status, was noise. Epictetus said, "If you wish to be good, first believe that you are evil." He meant stop pretending you are perfect. Start working to be better. Marcus Aurelius lived surrounded by liars and flatterers, yet he never became one of them. He reminded himself daily, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. That's the Stoic challenge. Stop talking about greatness. Live it. Because every time you compromise your values for approval, you trade strength for weakness. And the Stoics refused that trade. They believed virtue was self-sufficient, its reward was itself. Seneca wrote, "A good character, once established, cannot be shaken by fortune." That's the essence of being unbreakable. If your peace depends on applause, it's fragile. If your worth depends on wealth, it's borrowed. If your purpose depends on praise, it's hollow. But virtue, honesty, courage, restraint, those can't be taken from you. They are built within, brick by brick, through every small act of discipline. That's why the Stoics' calm was so terrifying to tyrants. Because you can't manipulate a man who doesn't crave approval. You can threaten him, insult him, bribe him, but he remains steady because he already owns the only thing that matters, himself. That is the essence of Stoic freedom, internal sovereignty. It's not detachment from life, it's engagement with it, fiercely, consciously, bravely. To walk through chaos and remain composed, to face death and remain grateful, to meet betrayal and remain kind. That's the mark of a Stoic. Not perfection, but presence. They didn't live to escape suffering. They lived to transcend it. They didn't seek immortality. They sought integrity. And in doing so, they became immortal in the only way that matters. Through example, because centuries later, their words still burn. Zeno's shipwreck still teaches resilience. Seneca's letters still whisper discipline. Epictetus's chains still rattle with wisdom. Marcus Aurelius's meditations still glow with grace. Their bodies turned to dust, but their strength became timeless. They prove that while you cannot control the world, you can command the one kingdom that matters, your mind. And when you do, nothing, not pain, not chaos, not death, can break you. That is the promise of Stoicism. That is the path to the unbreakable mind. It's not a set of rules. It's a way of seeing, a way of standing upright while the world trembles, a way of meeting every storm with a calm heart and steady eyes, whispering to yourself, as Marcus once did in the heart of empire, endure, accept, act, and remember you could leave life right now. So live with virtue, live with purpose, live like a Stoic, because time is short, the mind is yours, and the unbreakable are always forged in fire. If you've made it this far, you're not here by accident. Something inside you, the part that's tired of comfort, tired of excuses, and tired of breaking under pressure, knows this is the way forward. The Stoic path isn't soft. It doesn't hand you peace. It makes you earn it. But if you walk it, step by step, law by law, your mind will become something unbreakable, something untouchable, something truly free. Because when the world screams, you'll be silent. When life burns, you'll be calm. And when everyone else runs from the storm, you'll walk through it, unshaken. So if this message hits something real inside you, if even one of these laws made you pause, reflect, or feel your power return, don't just scroll away. Like this video so more people find it. Comment on the Stoic law that struck you the hardest. And share this with someone who's fighting their own storm right now. Because strength shared is strength multiplied. And remember this one line, the Stoic truth that built empires and survived centuries. You cannot control the world, but you can always control yourself. That's where true freedom begins.